Hi, so I'd like to talk a little bit about ancestors, all different kinds of ancestors, and the elements. So, a really important part of the cosmology is usually something called a creation story. And in the creation story, we learn how the earth was created, how it was made safe, how the different types of beings populated the earth, and how they made it possible for us as human beings to be here. And we also learn like what are our responsibilities and what are their responsibilities to us. So a creation story is kind of like introduction to animism. And I would just like to pull a few pieces out of that creation story or that system to talk about. The first one is human ancestors. Some ways I've worked with them, with my clients or with myself, other than human ancestors, and then finally the elements as the type of ancestors that are universal and oldest. Now, if we lived in a traditional culture, it would be the other way around. We'd learn about the elements first, then the other than humans, then the humans. But because we're starting out, many of us, as people without a tradition, I'm going to do it backwards. So, one of the things that I love about working with human ancestors is that you have two wonderful dynamics. The first is that it is the job of the ancestors to hold the knowledge, to remember. So that means that we don't have to learn everything or remember everything. We can go back into our bones and into our memories and into our dreams, and we can reconnect with things that may have been lost. And the second piece, which I think is just as crucial, is that we get to sort of go back and forward in time with the ancestors and descendants, and we get to sort of have a second chance. We all have a family member or an ancestor that we might wish had behaved differently in life or that we had had a different relationship with. Keeping and tending ancestral practices gives us a chance to have that second chance. And it doesn't matter how far back you go, you can have a better relationship with an ancestor or with just your ancestors in general. And yes, they pass down their wounds through something called epigenetics, but they also pass down their strengths and powers. And these can be, with the help of the ancestors themselves, healed. And when they do, it's like the ability to stretch back in time and pull strength from those who came before is very powerful. And it even gives people who decide to not connect with a shamanic or animistic tradition a way of being held by something that's larger than just them and their own helping spirits. So it's very, very powerful. One of the most important ideas about healing with the ancestors is that we are the patient, we are the descendant. So we don't do the healing. Other spirit helpers do the healing. But because it's our ancestors and our blood and bones, we have to be the ones to ask for it and to do whatever practices or rituals will complete the healing. So it's a strange paradox of we can't run the whole show, but we're the only ones who can initiate it. And that makes it, I think, very powerful. The other interesting thing about ancestral healing is that it really does work on a very powerful and even cellular level. So that after you receive a session, it's very normal to basically do some self-care or maybe drink a lot of water or things like that, because you're sort of readjusting to like a new you that is able to download energies that you weren't able to download before because there was too much static. The third thing about ancestral healing that I'll borrow from Daniel Four, who wrote the book Ancestral Medicine, is that it's important to know the difference between well ancestors and ghosts. This changes from culture to culture, but there's an idea that ancestors have to be properly mourned by the living. That's one of the reasons why we do our ceremonies for them every year, or we do their offerings, or we have an ancestor altar, is because they need our help to become ancestors. And then they come back as our descendants. And then we become the ancestors. So it's a very beautiful reciprocity, which is so much of what animism is about. So now I'm going to shift gears and talk a little bit about something that goes well beyond our human ancestors, which go back very, very deep. And in our dreams, it's possible for us to connect with these ancient ancestors and learn from them and bring that knowledge into everyday life. Or in our waking moments, when we do something that's very old, or we handle possessions that were held by our ancestors, we can feel those energies, those good energies coming through us. And this is to connect with those ancestors, whether plant, animal, or mineral, that are not human. And for this, we have the other than human ancestors. Now, these ones, sometimes you might think of them as like totem animals, or sometimes they're guardian animal spirits, or sometimes they're plant teachers, or sometimes they are places in nature, or like stones or mountains or things like that. But these are beings in the land who are not human. And the closest thing I can explain to this feeling comes actually from science. When I was once speaking to a woman who was a biologist, and she was talking about this particular type of jellyfish that she was studying. And she was trying to tell me that how ancient they were. And she says, I want to learn more about these ancient ancestors. And that really struck me, because I realized that for scientists and for animists, we have the same idea that those beings that came before us, even if they don't look like us, are also part of us. And it changes our ability to relate to them. And some of these are going to be very close to our families if we spent a lot of time around them, or if we're from a specific place. So now we get to something that's even more powerful and cosmic, and that is the elements. Now, for many cultures, there's 5 elements, which would be like 4 and then 1 element that kind of combines all of them together. There are other cultures which have more of them, like 5, 9, things like that. But I'm just going to pretend that we're just talking about 4 plus 1 element that combines all of them. And I will call those elements earth, water, wind, fire, and then storm, which combines all of them. So these elements are both very, very ancient ancestors. In some ways, the ancestors that came before everything else. They're sort of like the building blocks of the universe. And when you work with these beings, you're working with beings that are very powerful. Sometimes they're connected to the 4 cardinal directions. Sometimes they are connected to powerful spirit animals. Sometimes they're just connected to like prayers or chants or rituals that allow a person to connect with them. But however they are, each one of them is experienced as a being. And it's important as an animist, especially if you're going to do any kind of ritual work, to really feel those experiences of each one of the elements. I have been fortunate that I've been able to experience the elements in a few different traditions. And I can say that each one of these traditions, the elements have many, many things in common cross-culturally. And that experience has really made me realize that the ancestors, the human ones, were really dialoguing with something when they brought this information to the rest of us through the rituals and through the practices. The other thing that the elements can do is they not just power our magical work or our health or even parts of our bodies, but they also can turn around and help us relate to forms in nature like mountains, rivers, winds, the wildfires, things like that. And they also, when they come together as weather or storm, which is the most powerful weather, you can really see their great, profound power and even the ability to transmit messages if you are safe enough to be able to tune in. And I believe that if you want to do any kind of real work with the weather, it's been necessary for me and many other people I've known to have a dialogue with the elements. So this is just sort of an introduction to the idea of ancestors and elements. And to bring it full around to the creation story, if you can imagine these elements being on the earth, the powerful winds, the powerful rains, fires, and earth all coming together, and then gradually becoming more harmonious and becoming the ancient animals and plants and stones and places that populate our world. And then finally, when things are sort of like just right, our human ancestors can emerge. So I hope this is helpful and interesting, and many blessings.